Under the Nebraska sky in 2017, a young woman finished her night shift and vanished on a stretch of road only a few miles long, a distance so short no one believed it could swallow a whole person. Her car was found in a place nobody had any reason to pass through, its interior covered in strange marks no one could explain. Security camera footage disappeared at the exact critical moment, her phone signal cut off abruptly as if strangled by an invisible hand. And then as search parties pushed into remote trails, her small personal items began turning up, scattered like silent cries for help that no one heard. But the most terrifying part wasn't in the woods, wasn't on the dirt road, wasn't in the abandoned car, it was in the doctored internal records, the buried complaints, and a decade-long string of warnings no one wanted to look at. Because behind what seemed like an isolated disappearance lay a ruthless predatory pattern, shielded by a layer of authority no one dared question. As the curtain of truth is slowly pulled back, corrupted data suddenly comes back to life, witnesses who once stayed silent step forward, and one detail so tiny it went unnoticed becomes the piece that can blow an entire system apart. And everything people thought they knew about the night Emily disappeared will be turned upside down in ways no one could have imagined. Before we dive deep into this shocking case, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love stories that expose the truth like this one, don't forget to hit subscribe. Early winter winds swept through Grand Island, carrying the smell of cold earth and the dry scent of late-season corn. The parking lot behind CHI Health St. Francis was so empty, only a few yellow lamps still cast light onto the dark asphalt. Emily Hart, 25, ER nurse, walked out the staff door with the familiar tired posture of someone finishing a long shift. She pulled on her coat, clutched her canvas bag against her chest to block the wind, and walked while tightening her grip on her phone, telling her mom she'd stop for a few things on the way home. The conversation was short, calm, the kind no one could have guessed would be the last words they ever heard from Emily. Hospital cameras caught her unlocking her silver sedan, putting her bag on the passenger seat, closing the door, and driving out of the shadowed corner of the lot. The road from the hospital to her house wasn't long, and Emily knew every curve, every intersection. The camera at Casey's on Capitol Avenue recorded the silver car pulling up to the gas station. Emily got out, hair in a neat ponytail, phone in hand, picked out a few items, and paid. In the video she looked like always tired but alert, no sign of fear or anyone following her. After walking out of the store and getting back into the sedan, no one ever saw Emily again. When the family called, her phone rang once then went to voicemail. A string of worried texts stayed forever marked unread. At first everyone tried to calm themselves. Emily was often exhausted after a shift and sometimes fell asleep or forgot to charge her phone. But the house stayed perfectly still as if no one had come home. The bed was still made, lights off, the mug she always used still sitting untouched in the sink. There was no trace she had ever made it back. Worry grew with every passing hour. The family drove the area themselves. They retraced the roads Emily took, hoping the car had broken down or she was somewhere needing help. They stopped at Casey's, asked the clerk if anything seemed off. The cashier just shook her head. Emily bought a few things and left like any other customer. As the family drove the empty stretches near the canal, stopping at deserted lots locals rarely visited, a heavy dread settled over them like a huge shadow. Emily's phone stayed silent, no new transactions, no location updates, no outgoing messages. Her disappearance didn't match any of her habits. She always called home, always had a clear plan, always stayed cautious when alone. Every place they checked only confirmed one thing: there was no trace of Emily on the way home. It was as if after stepping out of the store, she had turned into a patch of darkness no one knew existed. Finally, when the worry became unbearable, the family called the Grand Island Police Department to report Emily Hart missing. When the hotline at the Grand Island Police Department rang, the duty officer thought it was just another routine disturbance call. But the trembling voice of the woman on the other end made him sit up straight. She said her daughter Emily Hart hadn't come home after her hospital shift, wasn't answering any calls, and the family had searched all night with no sign of her. The broken words, mixed with fear and panic, told the officer immediately this wasn't one of those adult walked away for some peace reports. He transferred the call to the missing persons unit right away and asked the family to come in person. At the station, Emily's file was opened fast. The on-duty investigator asked the family about her routines, work hours, wrote home, who she talked to most, places she stopped. The more he heard, the less it sounded like Emily just went somewhere on her own. She lived a disciplined life, rarely changed plans or went incommunicado, had no debt, no personal conflicts, no signs she wanted to leave. Her sudden disappearance didn't fit anything she'd ever done before. The investigation team quickly checked the route Emily drove every night. It was a short trip from the hospital to the main road, then into the South Side neighborhood, a drive she'd done thousands of times. But when they pulled footage from the hospital, Casey's and nearby businesses, they noticed something strange. The silver sedan was seen leaving the hospital, seen stopping at Casey's, then nothing. No footage of the car passing camera-equipped intersections, no clip of her turning, stopping or being approached. For a car to simply disappear from a fairly well-covered camera network was extremely unusual. While the criminal investigation team reviewed footage, the tech unit pulled cell tower data from Emily's phone. The signal showed the phone was still active after she left the gas station, but instead of continuing toward home, the signal faded and then dropped completely in the gap between two towers to the south. That wasn't a normal dead zone. Losing signal exactly there made investigators suspect the phone had been manually turned off or thrown away. Put together camera trail ending, cell tower connection cut, Emily never making it home, and no reasonable explanation for her behavior, all the data pointed in one direction: something went wrong on that drive. Emily appeared to have turned off her planned route, and that deviation happened in a very narrow window, right after she left Casey's. Small but strange details started forming a dark picture. Emily hadn't simply lost contact. It was likely she had been stopped, controlled, or forced to change direction the moment she was out of camera sight. From this point on, the case was no longer treated as a standard missing person report. It officially became a suspicious disappearance, opening the door to the long and complicated investigation ahead. As soon as the first pieces of evidence showed Emily's route had gone wrong, the top priority for the investigation team was locating her silver sedan. If Emily had been forced to turn somewhere unexpected, the car could be the most important piece of evidence, holding clues about what happened right after she left Casey's. Search teams were sent out in expanding fan patterns from the residential area into the less traveled fringes of Grand Island. When one team radioed that they'd spotted a silver sedan tucked close to a low line of trees at the edge of a South Side dirt road, investigators rushed to the scene. The first thing that stood out was where the car was parked. Not on the shoulder, not easily visible from the main road, but pushed far back against an old rusted fence on an abandoned lot. From a distance, the car practically melted into the overgrown weeds, making it clear it hadn't ended up there by accident. Up close, police confirmed the plates belonged to Emily, but the condition of the car was even more alarming. The body had no fresh scratches, no signs of hard braking or a blown tire, nothing suggesting mechanical failure. That ruled out the idea of pulling over for roadside help. Whoever drove the sedan here had deliberately parked it neatly, as if wanting it hidden from passing traffic. When they opened the door, the investigator immediately noticed something off. The driver's seat was pushed way back, much farther than Emily's usual position according to her family. Someone taller and bigger had been driving this car. On the passenger side floor was the paper bag from Casey's, left wide open, everything inside gone. There was no reason Emily would dump everything out if she had parked here herself. The deeper they looked, the stranger it got. Emily's phone and wallet were completely missing. Not in the car, not around the area, not in the nearby grass. That got special attention from police. If Emily had been attacked, the perpetrator almost certainly took those items to control her, or to prevent the phone from being tracked. On the back seat, a thin nylon cord was under the edge of the seat. It didn't belong to Emily, and the family confirmed she never carried anything like it. The cord was stretched and showed signs it had been pulled hard. A small detail but possible evidence the victim had been restrained. Near it, police found a faint scratch on the plastic trim by the door, too small to see with the naked eye, but under the forensic team's lights, it stood out clearly. Marks like that usually appear when someone tries to grab the door frame or fight their way out. On the rear floor mat, an odd indentation was documented. It wasn't clear enough to identify the object, but the pattern suggested something cylindrical had been placed there. Police didn't jump to conclusions, but they logged it because in organized abductions, perpetrators often carry specialized tools for binding or controlling victims. Outside the car, the ground around the parking spot also showed anomalies. The soil stuck to the front tires didn't match the soil where the car was now parked, proof the sedan had driven across different surfaces before stopping here. Most telling was a faint parallel tire track running alongside the car that didn't match Emily's tire. It was short and shallow, but clear enough to strongly suggest a second vehicle had been there. Police checked door handles and exterior surfaces. Almost everything was clean of fingerprints. Too clean for coincidence. Wiping down handles and the area around the doors isn't something a normal person does, especially in an overgrown empty lot, and it was a major red flag. Someone had deliberately removed evidence. All these factors, the hidden location, the adjusted driver's seat, missing belongings, subtle signs of a struggle, the unknown cord, the second set of tire tracks, when lined up together, formed a chilling sequence. Nothing suggested Emily left the car willingly. On the contrary, every detail pointed to the sedan being driven by someone else, and Emily likely forced into another vehicle in the moments after leaving Casey. When investigators cross-referenced the car's location with the cell tower data, they found an alarming match. The spot where the car was recovered lay exactly inside the zone where Emily's phone signal had abruptly died. That all but confirmed the theory that in the very short window where cameras couldn't see and the phone couldn't be located, Emily was intercepted and forced into another vehicle. In the internal briefings after processing the scene, no one on the team still thought this was an ordinary missing person case. They agreed every piece of evidence pointed the same way. Emily hadn't wandered off, hadn't had an accident. She had fallen into the hands of someone deliberate, prepared and experienced enough to erase the most critical traces from her car. Finding the sedan didn't bring Emily home, but it marked a major turning point in the entire case. And from that moment on, the search shifted completely into something new. A suspected abduction with clear criminal elements. Immediately after checking the immediate area around the car, the search teams continued expanding outward in all directions from the dirt road, paying special attention to narrow local trails that people rarely used but were still wide enough for a person or a vehicle to slip through unnoticed. Minutes later, they reported a major find on a small trail leading into the low woods to the west. They located a personal item, confirmed to belong to Emily, a plastic deer-shaped keychain that her family said she always carried. The fact that this small item had fallen right there sent the whole police team into high alert. The keychain wasn't the kind that easily comes loose. Emily usually attached it to a bag zipper or clothing pull. Investigators now believed it had dropped during violent contact or while she was being dragged away. A few hundred meters deeper in, the search team found another piece. A small strip of fabric that matched the color of the jacket Emily was wearing in the Casey's surveillance video. With two pieces of evidence so close together, police realized this was likely the route the abductor had taken with Emily, or at least where he had paused to regain control of her before moving on. To firm up the direction, police brought in tracking dogs. At first the dogs picked up a faint but clear scent trail leading from the keychain deeper into the woods, but when they reached a wet, open clearing, the trail abruptly stopped. The dogs circled repeatedly but couldn't pick it up again. That usually happens in two situations: the victim was transferred to another vehicle, or the suspect used some method to break the scent trail. The fact that the scent vanished completely with no spread to surrounding areas led investigators to suspect Emily had been loaded into another vehicle right there in the woods. When police canvassed residents nearby, one witness gave information that investigators immediately flagged in red. On the night Emily vanished, this person saw the lights of what looked like a police car moving slowly along the nearby dirt road. They couldn't swear to it, but the description of the light bar and reflector strips matched a police cruiser, not a civilian vehicle. Crucially, the witness said the car stopped for several minutes near the entrance to the trail, exactly where the keychain was later found. That detail changed the atmosphere in the investigation room instantly. In a normal missing person case, a police-style vehicle in a remote area at the exact time the victim disappears is far too specific to ignore. Police always treat witness statements, especially ones made in poor lighting, with caution, but a citizen spotting a cruiser-like vehicle, near the abandoned sedan was not something that could be brushed off as coincidence. The woods and open prairie south of Grand Island were immediately cordoned off for intensive search. It's a huge area laced with overgrown trails, abandoned lots and patches of low forest. The terrain is perfect for someone trying to stay hidden, secluded enough to park a vehicle, chaotic enough to make tracking difficult. Large sections have no traffic cameras or nearby homes, exactly the kind of blind spot someone familiar with the area or with local patrol routes would know about. From the suspect vehicle, to personal items left in the woods, to the witness statement about a police-looking car, the investigation began leaning hard toward a disturbing theory. The perpetrator might have authority, or at least deep knowledge of law enforcement operations. An ordinary person would have a hard time taking Emily silently, choosing camera blind spots, wiping fingerprints from the car, and moving along trails only locals or regular patrol officers know well. Police kept this theory quiet publicly, but internally they started reviewing lists of people with authority, access to specialized vehicles, or a history of activity in that wooded area. When all the pieces were connected, investigators understood they were no longer dealing with a random abductor. This was very likely someone skilled enough, bold enough, and confident enough to believe they wouldn't get caught. Someone for whom Emily's disappearance was not an accident, but a carefully prepared plan. These scattered terrain clues, though fragmented, opened a new, darker, more complex and far more dangerous line of investigation than anyone had faced at the start. Working from the scattered terrain clues in the southern woods, search teams continued expanding along dirt roads that cut through Grand Island's outskirts. Investigators knew that if Emily had been moved to another vehicle, the perpetrator would likely head farther from the original scene to avoid being tracked. The most logical direction led to miles of abandoned farmland, decaying barns, empty livestock pens, and neglected fields, an ideal place to dispose of something the killer never wanted found. While a team swept the wide grasslands southwest of town, one officer noticed an unusual concentration of crows near the old wooden fence of an abandoned farm. In Nebraska, wildlife is often the first indicator something is wrong. When forensics and investigators approached, they saw a gray tarp flapping in the wind, partially revealing what lay underneath that no one wanted to see: the body of Emily Hart. The moment sucked the air out of the scene. The body was found nearly 30 miles from the abandoned car, a significant distance that confirmed the victim had been moved a considerable way before being dumped. Emily was lying on her side, crudely covered by the old tarp. But the way the tarp had been placed, the drag marks in the dirt, and the unnatural position of the body made it clear this was not where she died. This was where she was left. The body had been transported from somewhere else, possibly the place where Emily was controlled, assaulted, or killed. Around the scene, police began collecting scattered evidence. A button lay several meters from the body. When compared to the clothing Emily wore in the Casey's video, it was confirmed to be from her jacket. Near the grass, a long hair was caught on a thorn, enough for DNA test. A small torn piece of fabric, apparently ripped during a struggle, had blown against the iron fence. And a few steps away, buried shallowly in the dirt, the forensics team found a tiny broken piece of black plastic that matched the type of interior trim used in police specialty vehicles. When that piece was placed next to the witness statement about a police-looking vehicle in the woods, an alarming connection started to form. The position of the body also suggested something. The killer hadn't simply dumped it in panic. Choosing an abandoned farm far from main roads, with a narrow access path and soft soil, was deliberate. There were no clear tire tracks, possibly because the ground was dry, or the killer parked farther away and dragged the body in. That matched the long interrupted drag marks forensics found near the fence. The perpetrator didn't dig a grave or cover the body thoroughly, but was smart enough to pick a remote, rarely visited spot far enough away to delay discovery as long as possible. Initial on-scene analysis showed time of death was not far removed from the time of disappearance. Injuries to the body, ligature marks on the wrists, bruising on the upper arms, and deep scratches on the legs, showed Emily had fought hard against her attacker. Everything pointed to a fast, strong, organized takedown. Some marks even matched the type of plastic restraints once used by police for temporary detention. Injuries to the jaw and ribs indicated she had been struck before being fully subdued. What sent chills through the team was evidence the body had been kept in an enclosed space before being brought to the farm. Soil clinging to the victim's skin did not match the farm, it matched clay soil from the eastern area, nowhere Emily normally traveled, but close to the woods where her keychain and fabric strip were found. This led investigators to believe Emily had been held somewhere else for a short time before the killer moved the body to the farm. As the forensics team continued collecting samples, investigators saw more and more parallels between the evidence and knowledge a law enforcement insider would possess. The ability to choose low camera routes, knowledge of remote land, knowing how to wipe fingerprints, knowing how to restrain a victim leaving only specific marks, all of it looked nothing like an opportunistic crime. The perpetrator understood police procedure, knew what to erase, what to keep, and how far to move a victim to keep police from locating the body quickly. From the moment Emily's body was found, the case was no longer a missing person investigation. It was now a deliberate homicide with transportation, disposal, and clear signs of a highly organized offender. In internal records, the Grand Island Police Department officially reclassified the case as a homicide investigation with top priority. The silence of the field, the cold metallic smell around the tarp, and the tiny scattered pieces of evidence, like the last whispers of an uneven fight, set the stage for a deeper, darker, and far more mysterious phase of the investigation ahead. As soon as Emily's body was removed from the abandoned farm, the Hall County Forensic Pathology Lab began the autopsy. Every investigator present knew this would be the most critical step in determining what happened to her in her final hours. Hours that the crime scene evidence had only hinted at. No one still entertained the idea of accidental death. Every sign pointed to third-party involvement. Pinpointing the exact mechanism of death would steer the entire investigation going forward. The preliminary report from the medical examiner quickly ruled out simple explanation. There were no injuries consistent with a car crash or fall from height. Instead, the organs in the chest and tissues around the neck revealed a grim truth. Emily died of asphyxia, a form of suffocation that caused oxygen deprivation and cardiac arrest. Bruising on the wrists and ankles showed she had been tightly restrained for a period of time. Faint linear marks across the radius bones matched plastic zip ties or similar restraints. This was not the sign of a spontaneous act, it showed clear control. While cataloging injuries, the pathologist noted multiple bruises concentrated on the upper arms and shoulders, locations typical when someone is yanked hard or fights against restraint. Deep scratches on the legs and knees were consistent with being dragged or pushed across rough ground, possibly in the wooded area where her keychain was recovered. All these signs lined up with the initial scene findings. Emily had been abducted, controlled, and moved to multiple locations before death. During closer examination, the pathologist discovered evidence suggesting sexual assault. This required the lab to proceed with extra care and confidentiality. Samples taken from Emily's body were processed on a priority basis, and the results silenced the entire investigation team. 2 separate DNA profiles from different sources were recovered. Finding 2 distinct samples opened 2 very different possibilities. Either more than one person was involved, or one person had left secondary DNA via an object, surface, or prior environment. Either way, it proved one undeniable fact. Emily had been in close proximity to at least one direct perpetrator shortly before she died. Notably, certain trace evidence on her skin and clothing only appears when a victim has been held in an enclosed, low-light environment, with hard angular surfaces. Marks on her back and shoulders indicated she had been pressed against a flat, hard surface, possibly a wall, door, or the floor of a small space like a trunk or narrow room. The pathologist also noted fine metallic dust on her collar and the back of her neck that matched dust commonly found in metal-structured rooms or areas with mechanical equipment. These details didn't provide absolute proof, but painted a clear picture. Emily had been held somewhere else before being taken to the farm. The full range of injuries, from restraint marks, drag scratches, control bruises, to signs of confinement, all showed the pre-death process was neither random nor impulsive. The perpetrator didn't just attack Emily, he deliberately moved the body to a calculated dump site. This reinforced the police's early theory that the killer was prepared, knew the terrain, and could control the victim long enough to erase traces and relocate the body. When the completed autopsy report was handed to the investigation team, its conclusion was unambiguous. This was an intentional homicide carried out in a sequence of control, restraint, assault, confinement, body transport. There was no longer any room for theories of accident or rash action. The case was officially classified as a homicide with violent and sexual assault elements, requiring investigators to hunt a perpetrator who was not only dangerous but highly knowledgeable about avoiding police detection. These findings didn't just clarify Emily's final hours, they raised a far more serious question: who had the ability, the skill and the insider knowledge to execute such a complex chain of actions while leaving almost no clear trail? From that moment on, that question became the central focus of the entire investigation. The conclusions from the autopsy report made the investigative team realize they had to go back to square one. The stretch of road where Emily left Casey's and vanished from the city's entire surveillance system. If Emily had been controlled for a clear period of time before she was killed, the moment she was stopped was the single most critical link to identifying the perpetrator. Therefore, police conducted a full reconstruction of her entire route that night, with a level of detail far greater than before. The camera team began collecting every piece of footage from traffic cameras, business cameras, and private residential cameras along the route between Casey's and the neighborhood where Emily lived. Some cameras were very old and produced blurry images. Others only recorded still frames instead of continuous video. But by cross-referencing timestamps, stitching the fragments together, and combining lighting data, they were able to determine Emily's exact path up to the moment she left the gas station. After the final frame at Casey's, the silver sedan disappeared completely. No trace on any intersection camera, even though logically it should have passed through at least 2 monitored points. This disappearance became even more suspicious when the technical team reanalyzed the cell tower data. Initially, they had only determined that Emily's phone signal gradually weakened and then vanished in the southern part of the city. But when the data was processed more thoroughly using software that analyzes distance between cell towers, they discovered something unusual. Emily's phone did not simply lose signal naturally. The signal cut off abruptly within a very small radius, an area so narrow that the phone would only drop like that if it was powered off or placed inside a metal container. That location was not far from Casey's, near a narrow intersection with little traffic, and it coincided with a witness statement about seeing a vehicle that looked like a police car in the area where a dirt road branches off into the wood. This overlap could not be ignored by the investigative team. When police returned to the witness who had mentioned the police-like vehicle, they discovered something irregular. The witness suddenly became guarded and partially retracted their statement, saying they were not sure it was a police car and that they might have remembered wrong. This change did not stem from any new information. It felt more like defensiveness than a genuine correction. The investigators, experienced in reading body language, all sensed clearly that the person had been influenced or was afraid of something. When pressed further, the witness dodged questions and refused to provide additional details. That nervousness only made the original statement seem more credible. Reconstructing the video and signal data helped police pinpoint a critical time window, from the moment Emily left Casey's until her phone signal dropped, a very short period, just over 10 minutes. That meant Emily was stopped almost immediately after leaving the gas station. And since no vehicle appeared to pull up alongside her in the Casey's footage, the interception had to have occurred at the exact camera blind spot the analysis team had identified at the southern intersection. When all the data was laid side by side, disappearance from camera, abrupt cell tower signal loss, the witness changing their story, evidence scattered in the woods, marks on the body, and the piece of plastic trim from a specialized vehicle interior. A scenario began to emerge. Emily had been forced to stop or diverted onto the dirt road by another vehicle, very likely one belonging to law enforcement or disguised to look like it. This dramatically narrowed the pool of potential suspects. Ordinary people do not have the ability to make Emily's car vanish from traffic cameras purely by chance. They would have no reason to be in the wooded area at the exact time Emily disappeared, and certainly would not possess the tools, knowledge and skill to wipe fingerprints from the car in such a sophisticated manner. In an internal investigative meeting, for the first time the term "inside the force" was officially put on the table. No one rushed to name names, but the direction of the investigation had clearly shifted toward the possibility that the perpetrator was someone with authority, deep knowledge of the surveillance system, and the ability to control a victim effectively in a short amount of time. And from that point, the case entered a phase where every step had to be taken with extreme caution, because if the killer truly had power, tracking him down would be far more difficult than dealing with an ordinary criminal. Suspicion falling on someone with authority placed enormous pressure on the investigative team, but the deeper they dug, the more they encountered invisible walls they could not break through. Although the scattered pieces strongly suggested Emily had been stopped and taken by someone who understood the surveillance system, a case can only move forward with clear evidence. And at that point the Grand Island police did not have what they needed most: a DNA match. The 2 DNA samples found on Emily's body were sent to the state lab and then entered into the national database. Matches in violent crimes usually come quickly if the perpetrator has a prior record or has previously had DNA collected for legal reasons. But the results that came back poured cold water on every effort. Both DNA samples failed to match anyone in the system. This was worse than they had feared. If the perpetrator had never been arrested, never been in the system, had no prior convictions for assault or violent crime, or simply had never had DNA collected, police had almost no way to identify the owner. The DNA evidence was powerful, but only when it could be matched. Here it only confirmed that at least 2 sources of DNA were present on Emily's body, a terrifying fact, but one that offered no new leads. It wasn't just the DNA. The physical evidence from the scene was also insufficient to build a solid investigative profile. The nylon cord in the car, the torn fabric, drag marks on the ground, the button, the piece of plastic trim, everything was important but lacked identifying value. They revealed the method of the crime, but not the identity of the perpetrator. A careful killer could leave such traces without fear of being identified. An even bigger problem lay in the technical data from potentially involved vehicles. When investigators reviewed the activity logs of every patrol car in Grand Island on the night Emily disappeared, they noticed an anomaly in one vehicle. A section of the log was corrupted. Timestamps didn't line up, as if the data had been interrupted or overwritten. That irregularity raised red flags, but technical errors in the system could not be treated as evidence. They needed grounds to request deeper inspection of the vehicles involved, and corrupted data alone did not meet the legal threshold to expand the investigation. When the team began asking questions about possible law enforcement involvement, they hit an even larger barrier: the internal system. Without a DNA match or direct evidence such as camera footage or a confirming witness, they could not request testing of any individual officer. The law requires specific evidence before personal property, vehicles or DNA samples can be seized from law enforcement personnel. That meant legally, they could not take the step they believed was most necessary. The Grand Island police also faced another difficulty: the silence of certain witnesses. The person who reported seeing a car that looked like a police car that night now firmly kept their distance, appearing frightened and unwilling to provide further information. Without witness cooperation, without video of the stop, and without any traces left by the killer's carelessness, the investigators were left with a series of unprovable hypotheses. Efforts to reconstruct the route, analyze soil adhesion, compare metal dust on Emily's clothing. Everything formed a logical story, but when entered into the case file, it remained just a chain of reason. In a murder case involving suspected internal involvement, reasoning alone is not enough to open legal pathways. They needed indisputable evidence, and they didn't have it. Time passed, and leads gradually dried up. No anonymous tips came in, no one stepped forward with accusations. No additional physical evidence was found in the area. Further tests all returned the same result: the perpetrator's identity could not be determined. In regular meetings, the heaviest sentence an investigator could hear began to surface: "We no longer have sufficient grounds to continue." Finally, after nearly 3 years of investigation with no progress, Emily Hart's case file was moved to cold case status, a drawer every investigator hates to touch. Not because they had forgotten Emily, but because they no longer had any legal path to continue pursuing the suspect they believed had caused her death. Frustration enveloped the team, but they knew that once a case was closed as a cold case, it would only be reopened if new evidence emerged. The kind of evidence that could break through the walls that had previously stopped them. And at that time no one could have imagined that new generation DNA technology, a few years later, would be the key to shattering the deadlock they had been powerless against. Emily's file being placed in cold case status did not mean it was forgotten. In the years that followed, Detectives in the Unsolved Crimes Unit periodically reviewed all the data, hoping a new technology or a newly entered DNA profile in the national system might produce a breakthrough. And then, in 2023, 6 years after Emily disappeared, what they had been waiting for finally arrived. The State DNA Analysis Center announced that they had applied genetic genealogy, DNA-based family tree analysis, to the 2 samples collected from Emily's body. This technology allows DNA to be compared not just for direct matches, but also to find relatives of the original source. It was the same technique that had cracked dozens of seemingly unsolvable cases in recent years. And for Emily's case, the result pointed to a name the team had once suspected but could never prove: the family of Deputy Daniel Reeves. Reeves himself was not directly in the system, but the DNA recovered from Emily's body matched a second-degree relative in Reeves's family tree, a coincidence too strong to ignore. This was not convicting evidence, but it was strong enough to justify reopening the long-dormant file. Immediately, the cold case team was mobilized, and the Emily Hart investigation was officially reactivated. While re-examining old records, the technical team attempted to recover the corrupted log from one of the patrol vehicles that had been active near the area where Emily disappeared. This time, using improved data recovery software, they managed to read the damaged section, and to their astonishment, the data that was thought to be permanently lost reappeared frame by frame. The technicians discovered that the patrol car assigned to Reeves had been in the exact wooded area where Emily's keychain was later found on the very night she vanished, something they had been unable to confirm earlier due to the log error. The convergence of the DNA result and the recovered patrol car data no longer allowed police to treat Reeves as a distant suspect. Both leads, one from new technology, one from restored old data, pointed directly to Reeves. The team immediately pulled Reeves's 2017 shift records and uncovered a previously overlooked detail. During the window when Emily disappeared, Reeves had an unexplained gap of nearly 1 hour in his activity report. Previously, that gap had not been scrutinized because there was no data to compare it against. But now it became a critical piece of the puzzle. When they overlaid the patrol car's location, Emily's lost cell signal, and the route missing from cameras, investigators saw that Reeves's movements that night matched almost perfectly with the locations where Emily's scattered evidence was found and where her body was ultimately dumped. No one else had such an illogical route at that exact time. The genetic genealogy link to Reeves's family shattered any remaining theories of coincidence. No one on the team still doubted Reeves's involvement. The question was no longer could Reeves be connected to this case, but what exactly did Reeves do and how long did he have before he disposed of the body? But to take the next step, searching Reeves's home, personal vehicles, and electronic devices, police needed an official search warrant. And to obtain a warrant, they needed a comprehensive, airtight presentation proving that Reeves was no longer just a potential suspect, but the central figure in the investigation. The team began compiling all the data: genetic genealogy linking the DNA to the Reeves family, recovered patrol car data, placing Reeves in the woods at the critical time, an unexplained hour-long gap in his shift, travel route matching the locations of Emily's scattered evidence, a witness who saw a police-like vehicle near where Emily's keychain was found. Everything connected into a chain of logic stronger than anything the team had during the initial investigation. In the decisive meeting, the cold case unit leader said bluntly, "If we don't get a search warrant now, we may miss the only chance to make this guy show his hand." And with a case file now bolstered by next-generation DNA technology and recovered technical data, the Grand Island Police officially prepared the paperwork to request search warrants for the property, vehicles, and entire residence of Deputy Daniel Reeves, the man who had been right in front of them from the beginning, but had never been within reach. Once again, the Emily Hart case entered a new turning point, and this time every road led straight to Reeves. As the search warrant packet was being finalized, the investigation branched into territory it had never before had cause to touch. Deputy Daniel Reeves's personal complaint history, the genetic genealogy hit that tied him to the kinship DNA, and the recovered patrol car data had already placed Reeves at the center of suspicion. Now detectives needed to understand who Reeves really was, and whether his past reflected the exact pattern of behavior documented on Emily's body. In just days, once the team gained access to the department's internal complaint archives, A string of troubling details surfaced. Previously, no one had noticed because there had never been reason to scrutinize Reeves this deeply. But now the scattered complaints suddenly stood out like long-buried footprints, finally revealed in melting snow. The first was 4 years old. A woman reported that Reeves had pulled her over on a night patrol and ordered her out of the car for no apparent violation. She said his demeanor terrified her, yet the internal investigation concluded no corroborating evidence, and the file was closed in days. There was no follow-up note, no evidence her statement had been fully vetted. Soon another surfaced. A young bartender complained that Reeves repeatedly showed up off-duty, inserted himself into her closing routine, and deliberately approached her while she walked home. She described feeling stalked and coerced into interaction, but the complaint was labeled insufficient basis and quickly shelved. Then more of the same began appearing, scattered across nearly a decade of Reeves's service. Women stopped for no clear reason, unwarranted pat-downs, accusations of being forced into a patrol car for minutes, and released somewhere else. In every case the common thread was the same. None of the complaints had been thoroughly investigated. All were closed unusually fast. Digging deeper, investigators discovered something even more disturbing. Several complaint files showed signs of timestamp tampering. The intake and closure dates didn't match the automated storage logs. Someone had apparently intervened to blur the trail of Reeves's misconduct. When detectives recontacted some of the women who had filed complaints years earlier, many refused to talk further out of fear or because they didn't want any more trouble. But others, reassured and told about Emily's case, began to open up. Their accounts repeated a cheating pattern behavior identical to what Emily had endured before her death. Control through authoritative tone, forced movement to isolated areas, confinement in tight spaces, consistent with the restraint marks on Emily's body, an approach that convinced victims no one will believe. Signs of sexual assault, but victims too afraid to make full reports. What sent chills through the team was matching Emily's injuries: wrist ligature marks, zip tie abrasions, blunt force bruising on the shoulder, metallic dust embedded at the nape, against descriptions from 2 prior victims, who said Reeves had cuffed their hands and forced them against a metal surface in the rear compartment of his patrol SUV. It was no longer inference, no longer a vague feeling. Reeves's behavioral pattern matched the restraint model documented on Emily's body perfectly. When the complaint history summary was presented at the briefing, silence blanketed the room, not from but from the realization every detective shared. They were facing the most dangerous kind of predator, one who had abused authority long enough to hide his crimes, and had succeeded many times before. From the DNA breakthrough to the recovered patrol car data, to the stack of ignored complaints, suspicion of Reeves had escalated from possible involvement to central subject of the investigation. With his behavioral record and complaint history now undeniable, the team knew they had no choice but to take the next step: obtain a search warrant for irrefutable evidence. The door to the truth had swung open, and behind it Reeves's silhouette was becoming clearer by the minute. Once the years of ignored complaints were laid on the table, the investigation knew there was not another minute to waste. Everything needed for a search warrant was already in hand: related DNA, location data, recovered dashcam footage, and a behavioral match too perfect to be coincident. Hours after the packet was submitted, the county judge signed a broad warrant authorizing a full search of Deputy Daniel Reeves's property, including the garage, basement, and any concealed area. When the tactical team pulled up to Reeves's wood-sided house on the outskirts of Lincoln, the air felt heavy, as if the entire neighborhood were holding its breath. Reeves was not home. He was on night shift at the substation. That made entry easier, but also heightened the agent's caution. A man who had abused power for years certainly knew how to hide what mattered most. From the moment they crossed the threshold, detectives noticed the subtle wrongness of the layout: too neat, too clean, not a speck of dust out of place. Every object was arranged as if Reeves wanted anyone who entered to believe nothing could possibly be amiss. To experienced eyes, that level of sterility was itself a red flag. The basement became the focus. Downstairs, dim yellow light fell on a freshly painted wall, a matte coat covering straight, unnatural scratches. Closer inspection revealed a hairline gap where the baseboard met the wall. A light tap produced a hollow sound, not brick, but empty. The tech team moved in immediately, removing panels of wood. The narrow seam widened into a large hidden panel. Behind it, was a metal door locked from the outside with no interior handle. Silence lasted several seconds. This was exactly what they had suspected but had not dared to confirm. When the door was forced, a damp metallic smell mixed with something cold rushed out. The room inside was small, windowless, soundproofed walls, gray concrete floor. A metal folding chair sat in the center, restraints still wrapped around its legs. Beside it was a mini filming light rigged with duct tape, a small microphone in the corner, a fixed camera on the wall. Dried blood speckled the floor despite obvious attempts to wipe it clean. This was not a temporary holding space. It was a purpose-built, repeatedly used detention room. The search continued. In a locked cabinet in the corner, they found dozens of external hard drives labeled with a private code system. All were sealed and rushed to digital forensics. Preliminary checks took little time. Each drive contained dozens, sometimes hundreds of sexual assault videos. Most victims' faces were obscured or turned downward, but the setting was identical. The metal chair, gray walls and cold white filming light, now discovered in the basement. Silence fell over the room when the third clip was opened. One detective recognized a familiar detail. The teal blouse Emily's family said she was wearing the night she vanished. In the opening minute, Emily appeared, panicked, hands bound behind the chair. The audio was low but clear. She was begging. Reeves stayed off camera, except when adjusting the light. Everything matched the injuries on her body: wrist ligature marks, shoulder bruising, metallic dust at the nape, and signs of prolonged restraint. It was no longer pattern evidence. This was direct proof. The hardest blow came from another detail. In many videos, Reeves was still in uniform, or had placed his duty belt and radio visibly in frame, as if he wanted to record his authority, wanted victims to remember that the person doing this to them was supposed to protect them. As the search wrapped up, the lead detective stood before the dismantled panel, staring at the cold metal door. Every question, every theory stretching 6 years from the night Emily disappeared, had just been unlocked, inside the home of a sworn police officer. From that moment, the investigation was no longer about suspicion or chasing leads. It had become a direct confrontation with a uniformed predator, and every piece of evidence seized from that basement, the videos, the physical items, the room itself, was now being packaged for the arrest warrant of Daniel Reeves. The moment police seized the videos from Reeves's hidden detention room, the investigation pivoted to a new, razor-sharp focus: identifying the women who appeared in the footage. No one on the team denied this would be the hardest phase, not just because of the workload, but because they would have to step into stories many had spent years trying to bury. Detectives started with the old internal affairs complaint. The names of women who had once reported Reeves, only to be ignored, now became critical leads. When recontacted, the survivors reacted in different ways. Some hesitated, some hung up immediately, but others paused for a long time before saying they had been waiting for this call for years. Surprisingly, many agreed to come forward despite the fear and pain. They said they were willing to relive it, because finally someone believed them, and because they wanted to protect others who had not been as lucky, including Emily. Statements were taken in a quiet interview room with no uniformed officers present to reduce stress. One woman described Reeves pulling her over for no reason, ordering her out of the car under the pretense of a safety check. When she resisted, his demeanor flipped instantly from polite to commanding, using his authority to force compliance. She was never taken to the basement room seen in the videos. But Reeves's method of control, sudden, cold, leaving no room for choice, matched the basement footage exactly. Another victim, who had filed and then quickly withdrawn a complaint, reached out to investigators on her own. She said that in 2019, Reeves forced her into his patrol car on a rainy night and drove to an empty industrial lot. There he used a calm, authoritative tone to intimidate her into believing no one would take her side if she fought back. Her account aligned almost perfectly with the videos the techs had skimmed. Reeves isolated the victim, weaponized his uniform, and controlled every second. They described the same repeating script. A case. Reeves always started polite, then turned ice cold without warning. A case. Always chose locations with no cameras and no witnesses, always emphasized his authority as an officer. Every action was calculated, never impulsive. When a victim pushed back, he went disturbingly silent. Investigators realized Reeves had a clear, repeatable abuse template that had operated for years, and without the basement videos, these statements might once again have been dismissed as before. One case stood out. A woman reported that after her shift, Reeves repeatedly appeared outside her home, idling in his patrol car for hours. She became so frightened she sent her daughter to sleep at friends' houses. When she complained to supervisors, she was told it was probably just area patrol. That normalization now served as evidence that Reeves didn't just abuse power, he stalked those he targeted. Many survivors described the identical sensation of falling into his hands, being cut off from the world, absolute loss of control, and the crushing belief that no one will believe me if I speak. When police told them the basement videos showed the same pattern, most were stunned. Some cried, some sat in long silence. Some said they finally no longer had to wonder whether what they remembered was real. The more women came forward, the clearer Reeves's long chain of crimes became. What had once been labeled insufficient evidence now snapped perfectly into place within his predatory model, a methodical, strategic pattern that had operated for over a decade. And with the statements from the surviving victims, the basement videos and the DNA evidence, the investigation knew it had crossed the line from suspicion into certainty. They now had an ironclad case to move into the final phase. The direct confrontation and arrest of Daniel Reeves. The fact that multiple surviving victims came forward at the same time to testify, combined with the footage from Reeves's basement, forced the investigation team to revisit a question that had been hovering over the entire case. How could a police officer with such a long history of dangerous behavior escape disciplinary scrutiny for more than a decade? That question wasn't just about Reeves, it was about the entire system that had allowed him to exist. In the first week after the victims' statements were recorded, an independent internal investigation unit was formed to re-examine every complaint ever filed against Reeves. When they reopened the police department's digital archives, the truth began to surface. Every complaint file that had been closed and usually quickly showed signs of timestamp tampering. Normally, every update to a complaint in the system carries an automatic timestamp, and the time gap between receipt and resolution is a key indicator of the quality of an internal investigation. But in Reeves's case, investigators discovered at least 7 files where the timestamps had been manually altered. A complaint logged as received on date X, but the server log showed it had once existed with an earlier timestamp. One complaint even had 2 different versions in the recovered system with different dates. This was not a technical glitch, this was deliberate interference. When the investigation team questioned the department's IT division, the answer sent chills down their spines. Not many people have permission to edit timestamps, only command-level officers have that authority. The first crack had appeared. In subsequent reviews, they also discovered complaints marked witness interviewed. Yet when they contacted the woman involved, she insisted, "No one ever came to ask me anything else. I thought they closed the file because Reeves was innocent." So it wasn't just timestamps being altered. The very substance of the internal investigations had been deliberately shortened or falsified. These signs pointed to a bigger question: had someone in the command chain helped Reeves dodge trouble? No one wanted to believe it, but the data refuted every attempt at reassurance. One 2015 complaint was closed in under 24 hours, faster than any other file from the same period. When investigators checked the internal email logs, they found a short message between 2 supervisors: "Handle it. Don't escalate." It wasn't clear what handle was supposed to mean, but the end result was the complaint being closed without a single formal investigative step. As the gravity of the situation became undeniable, the Nebraska State Police announced that the matter had to be reported to federal authority. Within days, the FBI officially opened an independent investigation into possible misconduct in the oversight of law enforcement in Lancaster County. The arrival of the FBI caused many veteran officers to go unusually quiet. Some cooperated fully, others were visibly wary. But when federal agents demanded full server backups, they found what only a rotten system leaves behind: deleted emails that still existed in old backups, vague internal directives to deprioritize complaints involving Reeves, 2 of Reeves's mandatory psychological evaluations that were never actually conducted, despite files marked completed. All of this showed that even if there was no direct evidence that command staff actively protected Reeves, the disciplinary system had completely failed to supervise him. Reeves wasn't a master at hiding his behavior, He was simply someone who knew how to exploit long-standing holes. When the findings were presented at a joint state-federal briefing, one FBI agent said it bluntly, "It's not that Daniel Reeves was good at covering his tracks. Your system did it for him without him even trying." That statement marked a turning point. The investigation was no longer just about finding Emily's killer. It was a full autopsy of the paralysis within the internal disciplinary apparatus, the very thing that had turned Reeves into a predator wearing a badge. And as the internal probe dug deeper, the task force knew they were approaching a moment that could no longer be delayed. The moment to confront Reeves face to face, not just as a suspect, but as someone who had exploited the very machinery that was supposed to control him. As soon as the internal misconduct was exposed and Reeves's file was handed over to the FBI, the investigation team planned to bring him in for questioning. But before that plan could be executed, another reality hit. Reeves had left town. That morning, when a team of agents arrived to execute a detention order for investigative purposes, they discovered Reeves was not at work as scheduled. His personal vehicle was missing from the station lot, and more importantly, a department-issued SUV had been taken without authorization. This was not the behavior of someone who was simply absent. It was the clear sign of a suspect who knew the net was closing. The FBI immediately issued a federal fugitive alert. The first lead came from traffic cameras on the southern edge of Lincoln, showing the department SUV leaving the city just hours after the search of Reeves's home. The vehicle was driving at normal speed, no violations, nothing to draw attention, as if Reeves had a pre-planned escape route. Agents quickly built a movement map using cell tower pings from Reeves's duty phone. Although he had turned off his personal cell, the agency device pinged one last time near the Nebraska-Kansas border. A police officer using official equipment to flee was unprecedented in Lancaster County, but with Reeves, it fit perfectly with the pattern of abuse of authority the team had already documented. The manhunt spread across multiple states, with the FBI coordinating with Highway Patrol to track the SUV. Each traffic camera provided a few seconds of blurry footage, enough to confirm Reeves was still heading west into the sparsely populated, mountainous region of Kansas, thinly settled country where cell signals fade and narrow roads wind between pine forests and abandoned farms. The next intelligence came from a gas station near Salina. Security footage showed a man in a baseball cap and dark jacket filling up an SUV with matching plates. Reeves spoke to no one, paid with a department card, and left quickly. The fact that he was still using the police department credit card stunned the agents, but it also drastically shortened the hunt. Clearly, Reeves had no long-term flight plan. He was just trying to reach somewhere he believed was safe, somewhere no one could touch him. Finally, a faint ping from the duty phone was picked up in the wooded area near Stockton Lake, Missouri, an area with a handful of old cabins, most owned by summer vacationers and empty all winter. The FBI pulled topographic maps and discovered that less than 8 miles from the last ping was a small cabin previously rented years earlier, using Reeves's own ID under the pretext of a hunting trip. As the tactical team approached, they killed their lights and moved in silent. Night covered the forest, only the sound of wind swept through the bare trees. The small cabin emerged in the darkness, a faint light in the window showing someone was inside. An agent shot the lock and the entry team breached in seconds. Reeves stood in the middle of the single room, no resistance, no further attempt to run. On the table lay the duty radio, an unloaded handgun, and a few scribbled notes, as if he had been weighing his next move when they arrived. He looked at the agents, said nothing, just sighed and raised his hands. A cop once trusted by his colleagues, who used to drive patrol through a quiet town, now stood in a remote wilderness cabin, handcuffed under cold flashlight beam. From that moment, Daniel Reeves was no longer a fugitive police officer. He became the central suspect in a years-long case of kidnapping, sexual assault, murder, and abuse of power. The escape route was over. Now it was time for the truth to enter the interrogation room. Reeves was transported that same night to the Federal Detention Center in Kansas City, where the interview room was already prepared with every piece of forensic evidence the team had collected over the years. As he was led in handcuffs to the chair, Reeves kept a stone-cold face, no panic, no confusion, not even a question about why he was there. He said only one thing when the interviewers began: "You've got the wrong guy." In the first hour, Reeves denied any involvement in Emily's disappearance and death. He claimed he didn't know her, had never met her, and had no reason to harm her. To every question about past abuse of power complaints or the basement videos, he gave the same answer. It wasn't me. But the interviewers didn't rush. They let Reeves build his comfort zone with the familiar denials, then slowly peeled the layers away. When confronted with forensic data, the contradictions became obvious. The lead investigator placed photos of the department SUV he used to flee in front of him. Reeves insisted the vehicle had been borrowed by someone else and he knew nothing about it. But traffic cameras clearly showed a driver with the same build, mannerisms and uniform. Reeves gave a faint smirk. "Footage that blurry, you're going to hang a case on that." The investigator didn't answer. He simply flipped to the next photo, a clearer still of Reeves pumping gas near Selena. Silence stretched for several seconds, then Reeves shifted from denial to attack. "I'm allowed to drive that vehicle. I'm a cop." That was the slip the team had been waiting for. Reeves had just confirmed he was the man in the video. When the basement videos were played, Reeves avoided eye contact, trying to stay calm. But in the second minute when Emily appeared on screen, his eyes flickered, just a tiny twitch, not enough to call a confession, but enough for the interviewers to see the first crack in his defense. Reeves said, "I don't know who she is." They were willing participants. "You can't prove anything." This time the investigators said little. They simply laid the timeline in front of him. The exact time Emily vanished. Reeves's vehicle movement logs, DNA matches from the crime scene and the basement, soil on the shoes in the cabin, matching the burial site, restraint marks on the body matching the rope recovered from Reeves's desk. The forensic chain formed a closed loop. No more coincidences, no more When the investigators walked through the entire sequence, how he approached Emily, subdued her, put her in the vehicle, held her in the basement, then disposed of the body, Reeves had no more verbal room to maneuver. He didn't confess, but he also couldn't offer a single plausible rebuttal. One investigator ended the session in a calm, clear voice. "You don't have to confess. The videos, the DNA, the timeline and the witnesses already did it for you. Everything goes straight to court." Reeves fell silent, his jaw clenched, the look of a man with no moves left plainly visible for the first time in hours. The interrogation was over, and the Reeves file officially moved to its final phase, preparation for federal prosecution, backed by evidence, so airtight there was no gap left for denial. As soon as the case file was transferred to federal court, Daniel Reeves's trial instantly became the focus of the entire state of Nebraska. The prosecutors knew this wasn't just about convicting one criminal, it was about exposing years of systemic abuse of power. When Reeves appeared in court wearing the orange prison jumpsuit, hands cuffed, the cold, calm demeanor he'd shown in the interrogation room was gone. In its place was the rigid tension of a man who knew there was no way out of what lay ahead. The prosecution's opening was meticulously prepared. They presented a forensic map tracing Reeves's complete movements on the night Emily vanished, perfectly matching cell tower pings, traffic cameras and soil samples stuck to his boot. Crime scene photos, DNA traces, and physical evidence from the basement were laid out as unbreakable links in the chain. On the large screen behind the prosecutors, carefully edited segments of video recovered from the hidden room played, edited to spare the audience unnecessary trauma, yet clear enough to prove Emily had been held captive alongside other victims. The surviving women were called to the stand. Their voices shook, but every word struck like hammer blows, nailing shut the last door Reeves had clung to. They described being pulled over for no reason, taken to isolated locations, threatened with the authority of an armed, badged officer. Some broke down when details from the basement videos matched exactly what they had endured, but the prosecutors patiently let them finish. Each story, each detail clarified the decade-long pattern of Reeves's behavior: approach, isolate, control, assault, threaten, release the victim once he believed they wouldn't report him. When the forensics team took over, the jury saw, one after another, Reeves' DNA on the restraints found in the basement, Emily's DNA in the same room, tiny blood spatters on the walls, showing the room had been cleaned repeatedly, distinct animal hair from the cabin where Reeves fled, stuck to shoes visible in older video. Digital metadata proving the basement videos were recorded during the exact window when Emily disappeared. No single piece stood alone. Together they formed an airtight chain the defense could barely touch. Reeves' defense team tried to shift blame, claiming the victims were consenting or misremembering. attacking their mental stability. The prosecution quickly shut that down by highlighting the identical patterns across every testimony. No way could every victim be mistaken in exactly the same way. The next defense tactic accused local police of bias and setting Reeves up to cover their own failure. The prosecution countered instantly with independent federal evidence, traffic cameras that couldn't be tampered with, cell tower data supplied directly by the carrier, never handled by local police, the basement hard drive's metadata matching system clocks before seizure. Even the judge had to remind defense counsel they couldn't argue pure speculation without evidence. In closing, the prosecutor laid out the clear sequence. Reeves abused his position to approach Emily, used a patrol vehicle to take her to the basement, assaulted and murdered her, then disposed of the body. Not a crime of impulse, but a calculated, repeated pattern spanning years. Emily was the final victim, but far from the only one. The courtroom fell silent as the jury left to deliberate. They returned in just over 2 hours. The verdict was read, short and final. Guilty on all counts. Reeves stood motionless, eyes empty. No fight, no outburst, just the final collapse of a man who had lived too long in darkness and power he thought would protect him forever. Less than 2 weeks after the guilty on all counts verdict, Daniel Reeves' sentencing hearing began. The courtroom was packed, not out of curiosity, but because many people had waited years for this moment. The women Reeves had terrorized, Emily's family, people who had finally seen light after years swallowed by the case's darkness. The judge read the sentence in a calm but unmistakably stern voice. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus consecutive sentences for sexual assault, abuse of authority, kidnapping, first-degree murder, and destruction of evidence. The extreme gravity of the crimes, the cruelty of his actions, and the fact that they spanned more than a decade, convinced the court that Reeves must never be allowed back into society. Reeves heard the sentence without reaction. He just stood there, eyes vacant, as if falling into the same void he had created for so many victims before him. For many in the room, the moment wasn't triumph, it was relief, a necessary end. As Reeves was led away, the Emily Hart case officially closed on paper. The 6-year investigation from the night she vanished to the horrifying discovery in Reeves' basement finally had its conclusion. Emily's family left the courthouse in silence, as though words were too small for the loss they carried. But just days after sentencing, when investigators thought it was over, an anonymous woman called the federal tip line. She said she had once been pulled over and terrorized by Reeves in exactly the way the news is now describing. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. When federal agents interviewed her, her story matched the others with chilling precision. Same approach, same threats using his authority, same cold intimidation that had kept her silent for years. She had tried to report it once, but was told don't pursue it to avoid trouble. Her statement triggered a domino effect. 2 more women came forward, and all 3 shared the exact pattern seen in the basement videos and old complaint files. This made one thing clear: Emily was neither the last victim, nor the first Reeves had killed or nearly killed. Luck, narrow escapes, or simply Reeves deciding to let them go for his own reasons, didn't change the fact that he had hunted for years. The FBI and Nebraska State Police immediately opened an expanded case, re-examining every unsolved missing persons report in areas where Reeves had lived or worked. Videos, hard drives, old GPS data, even historical patrol logs were pulled back in for fresh analysis. Even though Reeves would die in prison, the investigators knew the work wasn't finished. They couldn't be sure how many victims had escaped, how many had never come forward, and most importantly, whether there were still undiscovered disappearances tied to him. Emily's case was closed, but the shadow Reeves left behind remained, and now their job was to keep digging, to keep searching for answers, for the victims who still had no name in the files. While Reeves spent the rest of his life behind bars, the investigation had only turned the page to a new chapter. The revelations after sentencing, especially the new victims contacting investigators, spread across Nebraska like a wake-up call that Emily's case was only the visible tip of a much larger problem. When media released the FBI's preliminary report on years of internal misconduct, the state could no longer stay silent. The Reeves shock became the catalyst that forced the entire system to look at itself. Under public pressure, the state government announced a comprehensive review of police oversight procedures. A special commission was formed, including legal experts, community representatives, and an independent abuse investigation team. They examined every link in the chain: complaint handling, officer behavior monitoring, and mandatory psychological evaluations. Every gap Reeves had exploited for years without detection. Public hearings were held in Lincoln and Omaha. Local residents from people Reeves had once pulled over to families whose children had troubling encounters with police stood up one after another, asking, how could an officer hide unethical behavior for nearly a decade? How were complaint timestamps altered with no one held accountable? How did a secret detention room exist in a cop's house without anyone suspecting? That anger wasn't fleeting, it came from trust worn away over time. For many, the Reeves case created a deep unease. If one officer could do this undetected, how many more holes were hidden in the system? At the same time, Emily's family released a statement that moved many people. They officially launched the Emily Hart Foundation, an organization to support women who have experienced violence, victims of authority abuse, and families of the missing. The foundation's goal was not only financial help, but building a network connecting victims to legal services, something Emily never had when she first encountered Reeves. The foundation quickly gained widespread support, from local residents to national anti-violence organizations. Some of Reeves' surviving victims quietly sent letters of gratitude to Emily's family, saying their strength finally made them believe their own voices would be heard. Meanwhile, the FBI in Nebraska reopened several cold cases in areas where Reeves had operated. Unexplained disappearances, complaints closed too quickly, even 911 calls once dismissed as non-emergencies, were all re-examined. Not everything led back to Reeves, but the review itself marked major progress. The system would no longer ignore what once seemed like small red flags. Nebraska police academies also began including the Reeves case in their curriculum, not to breed fear, but to remind new officers that power must always come with accountability, and that every unusual behavior, no matter how minor, could be a warning of something far worse. Years later, the Reeves case is still cited as a painful but necessary lesson. No one wants to relive what Emily went through, yet Nebraskans believe the truth forced the system to change. From hidden misconduct to silenced voices, everything has now been brought back into the light. Emily Hart's case is closed, but its ripple effects are what make Nebraska determined never to let another Daniel Reeves emerge. For the community, it's not just a warning bell, it's a promise of vigilance, transparency, and responsibility in the years ahead. In the story of Daniel Reeves and the Emily Hart case in Nebraska, the most terrifying part isn't just one corrupt individual, it's how an entire system let him operate for so long. That's something very close to everyday life in America today, where the vast majority of officers are good people, but stories of abuse of power, covered-up records and ignored accusations still appear in the news from time to time. We see it clearly. Emily didn't disappear into some random void. Before her, many women had filed complaints about Reeves, but records were timestamp altered, hastily closed, or buried in a drawer. If even one of those warnings had been taken seriously, Emily might not have become a victim. The lesson here isn't don't trust anyone, it's trust, but always with oversight and questions, especially toward people in positions of power. Police bosses, managers, teachers. The hidden basement in Reeves' house, and his use of a patrol car and badge to abduct victims, show that the worst predators sometimes don't hide in the dark. They stand right under the lights, wearing a uniform that makes others automatically trust them. In real life, if you or someone you know feels something's not right when dealing with an authority figure, pulled over for no clear reason, asked to go somewhere isolated, threatened to keep quiet and avoid trouble, don't ignore that feeling. Write it down, talk to a lawyer, contact a support organization, or report it to an independent higher agency. Nebraska's overhaul of oversight procedures, reopening of old files, and the Emily Hart Foundation all remind us that change doesn't come only from courtrooms, it comes from communities. In the United States, you can take part by supporting victim assistance organizations, voting for candidates committed to reform, and most importantly, believing and listening to people brave enough to tell what happened to them. Silence once protected Reeves. Voices are what can protect the next person. If you think this story matters, and needs to reach more people. Please hit subscribe to join us on the next journeys, exposing the truth. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, with more stories that help us see justice and safety in our communities more clearly.